Good evening, neighbor, and I do mean you. We are privileged this evening to start a candidates forum for the vacant position of ANC2B04. That would be in the Dupont Circle area. And this will give you an opportunity to hear and see the two candidates that are running for office. The ANCs were established by the Home Rule Act of 1976, and they are the grassroots level of the DC government, separate from the legislature, the DC Council, and the executive, which is the mayor and all the agencies. There are about 40 ANCs in the city and about 300 commissioners. And we're going to talk only about one, and that would be ANC2B04. Let me tell you that the boundaries are important. They extend from Q Street north to S, and from 15th Street west to 17th Street. And the reason that's important is that if you live in that area, you can vote. And the election will be coming up probably in about a week at the ANC. And we're not sure about the details, but we'll get in touch with you. We'll distribute that information. I anticipate that the ANC will do their own noticing on that. But my experience is that it has to be done in person and it has to be done before the ANC meeting starts. And so I don't know how that's going to work, but we'll figure it out and we'll be informed. Do either of the candidates know? Do you have any information of the secret?
No, that's similar to the information I've heard. I don't have any specific details yet.
Okay, excellent.
No, the government just sent us a letter and said that the election had to take place before, I think it was July 7th.
That's what I heard too. I just am taking a peek now on our Facebook page. It looks like everybody is visible, even Tom Gregory and Robin Diener. So let me tell you that the discussion tonight is sponsored by DECAA, Dupont East Civic Action Association, dedicated to community engagement and civic action. It is also sponsored by the citywide Coalition on DC DDOT Bike Plans, the Library Renaissance Project, and the neighborhood listserv called Hear Us Now. I think we're ready to introduce our guests. We're pleased to have stellar candidates tonight. They'll each have a chance to voice themselves. They are Christopher Davis and Lawrence Sprowls. And I'm going to ask each of them to introduce themselves. And if you would just bear in mind that we'd like to know how long you've been in the Dupont Circle area and to what extent you've been involved in civic activities. So I'm going to begin with Lawrence Sprowls. If you would just begin to address us. The meeting tonight should last about an hour, and we're going to try to be conscious of the time.
Well, my name is Lawrence Sprowls. I live on Corcoran Street, probably the closest between 16th and 17th. Probably the closest landmark is the McDonald's on the corner there. I lived in DC since 1990 and my condo since 94. I participated in a number of ANC meetings, various discussions, and including the transportation subcommittee when it existed when it met in person, and before there were too many people for me to rejoin. That was taken care of by the last ANC commissioner for ANC, Pasternak, who was the last ANC commissioner for 2B04 before he moved out of the area. My chief concerns are with safety and particularly the encampments that have sprung up both within the ANC and within the district as a whole. So I would hope to spend some time on that subject.
Thank you very much. Christopher?
Hi, everyone.
Mr. Davis?
Yeah, thank you, Christopher Davis. It's an honor to be here. So I think some of you know, I grew up mostly in Ohio, moved to DC in 2006 originally for an internship at the Smithsonian in their Division of Architectural History and Historic Preservation. Then moved back here more permanently in 2007, worked at the US Green Building Council for 7 years, then did consulting with a large global real estate company. And now I'm focused very locally on green building sustainability activities with a company called Sustainable Design Consulting right here in DC. In terms of volunteer effort and civic engagement, for the last few years, I've been serving on the Friends of Stead Park board. I think a lot of you are familiar with that, where we're building a new recreation center, a new community center, I think a community resilience hub. I think it's going to be a really important resource for the community. For a few years, I also helped with the ANC's Zoning Preservation and Development Committee, primarily listening to what all of you have been saying about what the priorities of the neighborhood are. I think, my priorities, as I've stated before, I think are quality of life. Urban living is a difficult, challenging thing for a lot of people. I think safer streets and climate resilience are two of my top priorities. And I've talked about, wanting to find third spaces. A lot of our neighborhood is privatized, and parks and libraries, I think, are fundamental to making areas like this much more livable. So that's sort of where I am right now. And thank you again for having me here.
Well, thank you very much. I think we got off to a great start. There's a couple more people that are joining us, but they're going to be silent. And we invited them to come because they are having trouble with technology with the Facebook. So they're here to view. We are streaming live on Facebook, and it looks like it's successful. And we do have the use of a timer if we need it. I'm going to ask both of you. The first question is, why do you want to run for this position? It is difficult. There are certain arduous aspects to it. And I'm going to start with Christopher this time. I thought you both did fine with the time. We don't necessarily need a clock, but I'm going to start you off with a minute.
Mm-hmm. I think I want to serve in this role because I think this is sort of a job interview. I feel like I've had a lot of privilege with the people I've learned from throughout my career, and I think I can offer, some experience to some of the issues that we're dealing with and trying to, solve more problems for more people. That's, I think, why, some of my friends asked me to run. I think primarily they just want me to talk about what we're doing at Stead Park, because I think it's going to be a really important resilience hub for the community. But yeah, I guess I'll leave it at that. People have asked me, and I'm honored to potentially serve if that's what you all want.
Thank you, Christopher. Mr. Sprowls, when you're ready.
Sure. Nobody asked me to run. I decided to do it on my own. So, however, I was able to collect at least 25 signatures. So I guess I have at least 25 supporters. Anyway, my interest is, I think, because I think that the ANC has been too narrow in its focus. Most of its time at meetings that I've attended, and also looking at the schedule when it's published, has been on really just on two things. One, the approval of restaurants and bars, A, and B, has been on new property and changes to housing. Changes to when people want to make changes to their properties, or somebody wants to build a new house, to review that and report back to the government with the impressions. I really think that the ANC should be broader, in particular, paying attention to the crime in the neighborhood, and in particular the encampments. I think everybody should know that at least two of the ANC commissioners, Robin Dunn and the outgoing Commissioner Pasternak, were supporters of the encampments. They did not want the encampments to be removed. They wanted them to remain there. That includes even the 17th Street encampment that was in front of Safeway and was so horrible for every person who attempted to visit the store. I know of some neighbors who would not even go to the store during the day because Stacy Jameson, who was in that encampment, would harass them, yell at them, scream at them. So I think that the encampments are a serious problem, and they result, as we've seen, and particularly in Thomas Circle, we can talk about that in a moment, even though that is outside the ANC zone, that this is causes additional crime problems, and I think that this should be addressed by the ANC. In addition, I would also put the streeteries on there on the list, even though it seems like the city has largely bypassed the ANCs in setting
Very good.
the streeteries.
Yeah, thank you for your comment. Let me say that I have a few questions prepared, and they follow the structure of the ANC. There are two standing committees on ANC2B. One is for mobility transportation, and the other is for urban development. And we will touch on both of those, but that will be the way that we will proceed. I'm going to start with the first question having to do with the operation of the ANC as being transparent and encouraging community engagement. Some of us are disappointed that the ANC right now in Dupont Circle relies on emails to notify its constituents, and it's about 18 or 20,000 people that it has to notify when there's a meeting coming up. And what we're discovering is that everybody doesn't have an email address and will never be notified that way. And they don't have a computer where they can visit a website. So all of that fails. Another error, it seems to me, is that notices are sent out for committee meetings, and sometimes they're only 24 hours or less that a meeting is being held. And this is the opportunity for residents, if they're interested in a particular topic, to see a guest or have a discussion. The committees are really an opportunity to have more or less a real discussion. There's no notice. And the last aspect of this is that we have been visited by a controversial and disruptive bike plan on 17th Street. And we have been skirted as far as community engagement goes. So I think this will come up a little bit more later, but my question is this: if you're elected, how would you improve the operation of the ANC in community engagement? So, and we'll have Larry start. I'm sorry, I don't mean to be, I'll call you Mr. Sprowls. Is that agreeable?
Larry is fine.
Thank you. Go ahead, shoot.
I found that the meetings themselves, that is the meeting of the entire ANC, is acceptable. As far as notification, the truth is that now people just have to have an email account. Either you need a computer or you need a phone. It's very inexpensive to obtain a phone, and you can get a service plan that includes data for $5 or $10 a month. It's just a requirement these days, even if you're trying to go in your bank account and it's going to send you a text message, you have to get the code in order to even get into your into your bank account. That's become more and more de rigueur. So I do not think that it's a requirement that the ANC change how it is notifying people. However, I will add this. One, people don't know anything about the ANC. They don't even know it exists. When I was going for to collect the signatures, people would just say, well, it's an ANC, or they would just sign and they didn't even care. So I think that publicity needs to be more about the existence of the ANC. And once people sign up, then they can get the notification in the normal way. And I think email is acceptable. However, I will note that the way the emails are formatted, they're not formatted properly to look on a phone. They're only formatted for look on a PC because they don't shrink down properly. And that can be solved by somebody who knows what he's doing in terms of web design. Finally,
right, thank you very much.
Wait, I have 20 more seconds. Finally, I will say that the message notifications are set too late. Sometimes even on the day of the meeting. There's no reason why it can't be done at least 2 days in advance, so people can decide whether they're interested or not.
Good, thank you very much. Christopher, let me start the clock again. I'm sorry. There you go.
Yeah, I think those are solid ideas. I don't consider myself an expert in this particular area. I think, other members of the ANC probably share a lot of those concerns. I mean, if we can provide better technology for people, that's an excellent solution. I've thought, can we do something to revitalize local journalism and work with, I don't know, other forms of communicating these things. I mean, I think the meetings are on a regular schedule. It's really just, what cases are going to be discussed at those. So, if we know when they are, it's just a matter of getting the right information in front of people. I think, there are a lot of ways that we can do that. Because, I agree that having people aware of what's going on so that they don't, feel shocked by some new proposal is incredibly important, because I don't know, I keep saying the only constant is change, and it's all around us, and making sure people are notified in advance to make sure they're involved is important.
Thank you. There's very perceptive comments. Let me say this, at least with respect to Mr. Sprowls' comments and yours, is that some of us are of a certain age where the technology is extremely frustrating and we want to rid ourselves of it rather than to embrace it. And every couple of years it changes. It is extremely frustrating. And what I'm encountering in Dupont Circle is a great many people who do not have, it's one thing to say you have to. Yeah, they have to, and yet they're not. And that affects the legal obligation of ANC to carry out its lawful obligation. I wanted to say something else. Maybe it'll come back to us, but very helpful. I'm glad that you're thinking about these sorts of things. We may have to go as an alternative, go back to papers and flyers and put them on telephone poles, because we don't have telephone poles in Dupont Circle, but we'll find a place to post them. Does that seem reasonable? Flyers, paper? Safeway used to have a bulletin board.
Yeah, but the truth is that those days are just gone.
Those days
People are
gone.
just going to have to, I think most people do have a cell phone, and plans are not that expensive. And we can, I think by improving the message content or the structure of the message, so it's more easily readable, and sending it in advance, that this problem can be solved.
Well, it has to do with communication. Okay, let's move on to another topic. Now I'm going to start mobility. There's going to be three major questions here, but we'll start off with, do you own a car? And this is brief. Chris, Mr. Davis, let's start with you on, do you own a car?
I do not.
And do you use public transportation, and for what purposes and how often?
Well, I've been using Capital Bike Share a lot because someone stole my bike. Yeah, I try to walk everywhere and bike everywhere. My office is a 15-minute walk, 5-minute bike right away. So a car would just be an inconvenience for me. I know they're necessary and important for a lot of people, and we need to accommodate equitable access to different transportation options. But yeah, I personally do not typically.
That's great. Those are the three questions. Let me ask you, Mrs. Sprowls, do you own a car? Do you use public transportation, and to what extent? And do you ride a bike?
One, I did actually just buy a car had it delivered on April 26th. So I decided that I needed to get out more into the wilds. So I did purchase a car rather than continuing to rent cars. Two, the question was public transportation.
Public transportation. Do you take the bus or metro?
Yes, more the bus, because the S2 is right on 16th Street. And bike, yes, I have a bike, and I do belong to Capital Bike Share, and that's probably the most common way I get around.
Well, let me ask the two of you, what do you do when it rains and the weather is terrible? And there seems to be an unspoken message that if you would only try to use a bike, you'd be surprised how much you would like it. The problem is that the weather doesn't cooperate, and you may have to carry something with you, and you may have to go 3 miles and not just, half a mile. So what do you say to the problems of weather and other obstacles for biking?
Who are you asking?
Let me start with you,
Me? Larry?
Mr. Sprowls.
Oh, okay. What I have typically done is tried to group trips together, and then until I had a car, which I only had for a couple of weeks, I would rent a car and do all my errands in one batch. I found going to the Budget on L Street was really convenient. I could just rent a car from them and keep it for 24 hours. I never found that the 1 or 2 hour rentals made a lot of sense, because you just couldn't do very much in an hour or two. So it made more sense to rent a car for the longer period. In other
That's
cases,
an interesting testimonial.
in other cases, I've used Uber, like to go to Home Depot when I had to bring a bunch of stuff home. I really, the car was just for long distance, not for use so much around the city.
Mr. Davis.
Yeah, I mean, raincoats are a possibility, but yeah, biking is difficult in a lot of situations, definitely. I mean, I would say that, you know, I try to, if I know inclement weather is coming, I try to work around that if possible, but I'm not opposed to and not foreign to using car share and, you know, Ubers and Lyfts, especially when I'm with friends. I guess the other thing I've thought, and a lot of people have said, is like we live in the middle of the city and it's possible to get almost anything delivered to you within 24 hours now, which can significantly reduce the need to travel long distances. But yeah, it's a challenging, complex issue. But yeah, inclement weather puts a challenge into this.
Yes, exactly. Thank you for that recognition from both of you. I appreciate that. All right, let me move on to more substantial things. Many people are confused by the 17th Street bike plan. Drivers, pedestrians, even cyclists. The signage is contradictory and hard to see because parking is in the middle of the street away from the signposts and because of obstructions. Metro Access, which delivers handicapped people, and delivery trucks park in traffic. Delivery trucks park in crosswalks and intersections because they cannot find a safe legal space to park. Confusion is hazardous. Ticketing will not fix a reckless plan. DDOT has refused to hold a public meeting. Councilmember Brooke Pinto, who announced the major breakthrough in traffic plans in March of last year, has also refused to hold a public meeting. Dupont ANC has not been very helpful with this at all. They have not interceded in our behalf. Here's the question. Would you support a public meeting to inform and engage the community on the 17th Street bike plan? So we'll start with you, Mr. Davis.
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. I mean, I've been told that the plan meets transportation design standards, but I definitely see the issues that you're talking about. You know, parking in the middle. I don't know. It's one of the most popular social spaces we have in the neighborhood, and we host events there all the time. So, you know, having anything permanently in the middle of that large open space, I think, you know, causes issues. And we've, you know, talked about universal design access and, you know, abilities of, you know, people to get where they need to go. The idea of turning that strip from P Street to R Street into a Woonerf, this Dutch term for a shared street, potentially raising the street to sidewalk level all the way across, so it's a smooth surface, you know, from all the way from Floriana to Dupont Italian Kitchen. But yep, you know, potentially with retractable bollards that are down most of the time, you know, maybe controlled by remote sensors. A lot of people are excited about the potential for automated vehicles and connected technology across these things that can help solve some of these problems. But I don't know. I think it's a really special place, and we could do better with it.
It's a special place, and it may require special means. And I will share this with you. DuPont Circle Citizens Association was in talks with DDOT on the Woonerf on 17th Street, and they were interrupted after a series of meetings that were led to believe that it was being taken seriously, and they suddenly introduced this plan and installed it. So I think I like what you say. Mr. Sprowls, how do you feel about, would you support a public meeting to inform and engage the community on this plan?
I don't want to rehash this anymore. I think the problem here is between R and P is due to the streeteries, which cause the lanes to shift. The lanes that are north of R and south of P are fine. It gets screwed up because of the streeteries, which protrude into the street and force DDOT to come up with another routing to accommodate the bikes and cars. And what's particularly disconcerting is south of Corcoran Street, where I live, the cars and bikes are forced back together because the bike lane comes to a halt. Now, it's my understanding that the streeteries will sunset at the end of 2023. When that happens, assuming that the streeteries are not removed, assuming we're not going to talk about that anymore, then I think that the lanes can simply be made consistent with what is done north of R Street, south of P Street. They'll be back to normal, and I think it will be fine.
Well, what I'm hearing from the two of you is,
excuse me, I do.
Yeah, go ahead.
Let me finish. I do appreciate the northbound lane for bikes. I think that was a great change that with DDOT was made, because previous to that, when you hit Massachusetts Avenue, what did you do? There was no place to go. So by putting the northbound lane on 17th Street, I think that made a major change. And I think that it can be fixed after the streeteries are removed, assuming they're not permanent.
well, 2 months ago at the ANC meeting, Brooke Pinto was a guest, and she announced that the council has extended the streeteries for 2 more years. And then she apologized because the public had not been consulted and the ANCs had been ignored. And she added to the legislation that after 2 years, the ANCs will be consulted. And this is really a limp wrist approach to the whole problem. But if you're not going to talk to the community and you're not going to engage with us, I don't know. I mean, nobody set you up to rule us. We want a hand in some of this. So I agree with you. There is a lot of frustration, Mr. Sprowls, about the streeteries. And it is solving the problem isn't by ignoring the community. Good, thank you so much. Let me move on to the next question. It also has to do with 17th Street. The nexus of commerce and residences on 17th Street enables the livable, walkable community that make our neighborhood a desirable place to live. Removal of patron parking and parking for delivery trucks jeopardizes the survival of businesses and puts the livable, walkable community in jeopardy. Dupont Circle on Connecticut Avenue used to be a thriving, fun place to visit. It is a dead zone now, and after this experience, it is difficult to revive it. So we want to be really taking care of all the wonderful situation we have on 17th Street and not play with it carelessly. Even cyclists avoid 17th Street. Dupont Circle Citizens Association, our sister Civic Association, in November last year passed a resolution rather overwhelmingly calling for the removal of the bike lane. In December, the executive director of historic Dupont Circle Main Streets, who is himself an avid cyclist, said that an evaluation should be made on 17th Street to see whether or not we need the bike lane there because it's not being used by cyclists. So this is my question. Would you join the growing chorus of residents and community leaders in calling for a reevaluation of a reckless bike plan? So let me start. I'll start with you, Mr. Sprowls. Here goes the time.
No, I would not remove the bike lanes, northbound or southbound. I think, as I said, once a streetery is removed, which is supposed to happen at the end of 23, that the lanes can be realigned. And I think that the resulting solution will be acceptable. So no, I do not want to remove the bike lanes. There is no other place for cycling. 15th Street is too far away. 16th Street is not suitable for biking because of the tunnel. 18th Street is too narrow. And 19th Street, where you're already hitting the circle and basically you're out of the neighborhood.
Well, let me clarify something. I'm not talking about removing the bike lane per se. The bike plan seems to me not ill-conceived. And that includes the bike lane and the traffic plan and so on. So it's all tied up in a package. And I think what I'm asking you is, do you think it should be reevaluated?
I think only that as I said, that the lanes can be adjusted after the streeteries are removed, and it can be set back to be consistent with what is south of P Street and north of R Street, and it will be fine. This has been talked about too long. The decision's been made. Let's just leave it alone.
Thank you. Mr. Davis.
I mean, this is a really difficult issue. I think, a lot of people have raised concerns about people on bikes or scooters using sidewalks. I mean, the reason they do that is they don't feel safe in the bike lanes. We need a network of protected and connected bike lanes in order for people to feel safe biking around the city. I think one of the interesting things about 17th Street is that it dead ends at Florida Avenue. It's not a through street at all. So it's actually fairly, I think, probably a good place that we can, accommodate more forms of transportation. I personally support the streeteries. I like outdoor dining. I think it's probably an economic boon for our neighborhood. Obviously, we need to make sure that waste is managed properly and they're maintained properly and that they're safe structures. And if we need to figure out financing structures to make sure that they're paying their fair share, I don't know. I'm also interested in, can we find garage parking somewhere so that people don't have to park on the street? Storing vehicles in the middle of a vibrant public space, especially as vehicles are getting larger and larger. It's a geometry problem. It's really a challenge of where we fit all of these things and meet everyone's needs.
Thank you, very thoughtful. Let me ask you this, Mr. Davis. You notice that directly in front of the hardware store, there's an empty space that has been made illegal for parking. And it is like a no man's land. It is really the extension of the streetery at Annie's and Dupont Italian Kitchen. They won't let anybody go in there, and the hardware store has lost all of its patron parking as a result. And it cannot be used. If you want an example of an ill-conceived plan, that's really one of it, and it's hurting the hardware store. I think we have to keep in mind that the streets themselves are public territory and they should not be handed out for free, and that perhaps a charge can be made. Well, I think a fee is being charged for the streeteries, but in any case, you cannot eliminate community engagement at the same time that you rob people of patron parking. If anybody needs a car to pick up their ladder or their mulch, it was the hardware store that needs it. Well, let me move on unless you want to add to any of that. All right.
I'd like to add something.
Okay, please.
The hardware store has an alley right behind it, including 2 parking spaces. So if somebody needs to pick up something there, you can just simply go into the alley. However, I think that once the streeteries removed, and I hope we can discuss the streeteries as a separate topic, or as a question, that you have a question about the streeteries, because I do have a couple of comments about that.
Let's see if we can breeze through some of this. I think we're moving along nicely, and we'll give you a chance to bring up something. All right, now here we go with the protected bike lanes are dangerous for city roads and inappropriate for congested commercial stretches like 17th Street. Depending on the frequency of interruptions, like intersections, alleys, and driveways, protected bike lanes are not safer. The correct term for protected bike lanes is cycle track. They changed, they rebranded the term to imply that people could feel comfortable and safer, and it is misleading. Candidates for public office, we live in an election season, are saying that they want more bike lanes, particularly the protected bike lanes, and they want to see their children ride their bike to school. But this refrain defies the simple fact that the streets are not playgrounds. Even DDOT says that protected bike lanes are not designed for children under 12. Where are the children going to go? If they're not allowed in the protected bike lane, are they going to go into the traffic with the trucks? No responsible parent would send their kids to school on a bike in the inner city. All right, here's my question to you. What would you say to parents of school-age children? Let me start with you, Mrs. Sprowls.
You're asking me, what would I tell parents of school-age children how to get to school?
Well, would you encourage them to use their bikes to ride to school? We have a Ross Elementary School. None of those children, however many there, hundreds there are, would be allowed in a protected bike lane or be considered safer in a protected bike lane. And here we have voices, some of the parents at Ross saying that they would like to be able to send their children to school on their bikes.
My experience with the children at Ross Elementary is that they all walk to school. There is a bike lane on our street. There's a bike lane on Q Street. And now there's a bike lane both directions on 17th Street. And I do see children on bicycles. However, they are generally on the sidewalk. I guess I don't see.
No, you're doing good. I appreciate it.
I really don't see a problem that the city can fix here.
Thank you. Sometimes the city just should not get into it. Mr. Davis, let me give you some time.
Yeah, that's a tricky question. I'm not a parent. I don't have kids, but I think if parents want their kids to be able to bike to school, we should allow them to do that. I think it really is a question of how do we make those lanes truly safe and protected for them. I mean, I don't know. The way I look at it is that we should prioritize the most vulnerable users of the street first on up. People on bikes, people in strollers, people walking, people in wheelchairs, and then on up to public transportation and private vehicles, because it's the private vehicles that are killing people and kids.
Thank you. Just as direct.
I have not killed anybody since I purchased my car.
Thank you. That is appreciated. All right, next question. The Washington Area Bicycle Association, WABA, reports in its tax filings spending more than $100,000 in advocacy for bills in the council and receives grants and funding in return in a close relationship with council members and DDOT staff. The founder of WABA is a top official at DDOT. WABA currently champions 6 bills in the DC Council and wraps each in language of safety to allay the fears that people might have for biking. The bill called the Idaho Stop, which allows cyclists to run stop signs, has been rebranded by WABA as the Bicycle Safety Stop. And let me explain something about that. This would allow a person legally to run a stop sign. If you want your children on a bike, imagine a child on his bike on his way to school and he runs a stop sign and he's hit. Who's responsible for that? Where is our sense of responsibility? Let me finish this a little bit and I'll ask the question. But while it says that it's for safety, WABA opposes a requirement that cyclists wear helmets because it discourages bike use. WABA seems more interested in promoting bike use at the risk of public safety. Our civic association, DECAA, is pursuing a complaint with the Board of Ethics to have WABA declared a lobby organization. So the question is, should WABA register as a lobby organization? Let me start with you, Mr. Davis. Do you think the relationship between—
What are you asking me, or?
Yeah. Do you think that the relationship between the promoter of bikes and the city council and the agency for transportation is too close?
No, I think they're a nonprofit. But, yeah, I'm not a member of WABA. But, yeah. I mean, I think their priority is to make the streets safer, but yeah, I haven't really looked into all of those issues.
Thank you. Mr. Sprowls, how do you feel about having an examination to see whether WABA is actually a lobby organization than a charity.
I don't see the necessity to do that. As far as the Ohio stop
Yes,
goes, the truth is that that's just modeled on what bicyclists do. Bicyclists don't sit and come to a full stop at stop signs. So it just makes sense to legalize what bicyclists are going to do anyway. When a bicyclist comes to an intersection, he looks back and forth. He's using a 30-pound bicycle, not a 3,000-pound car. So the safety or the lack of safety that's caused by a bicycle is far, far less than would be imposed by a car. So I don't see anything wrong with with just legalizing what bicyclists do anyway, and making the Ohio start part of the Idaho stop as part of the rules of the road.
there's a certain logic in what you're saying. I've heard that many times, and sometimes it works. But if you take a 12-year-old, their brains are not fully formed, they're reckless, they're irresponsible, they lose their concentration, and you're going to let them legally ride through a stop sign, you're inviting disaster, you know?
I'll comment on that. Is that what I've seen as far as one, it's the responsibility of parents to teach their children how to ride a bike. And two, when I've seen children in this neighborhood, they're riding with the parents. It's very rare to see a 12-year-old on a bicycle by himself. And if we're dividing the bike lanes and we just have the rules explained, and also it's my understanding that below a certain age, it is a requirement by law that children wear helmets. And the truth is nearly everybody rides a helmet except when using a capital bike share. A lot of people don't use it there.
When they're on the way to work, right? Okay,
Yes.
very good. Let's move on to the second major organizational element in the ANC, which is development, historic preservation, and so on. Here we go. The previous 2B04 commissioner ran on a slogan of more housing, subscribing to the smart growth theory espoused by groups like Greater Washington, that holds that all new housing, even luxury housing, benefits moderate and low-income residents in a sort of trickle-down manner. Manhattan has shown this theory does not work. There's a lot of density in Manhattan, and none of it is expensive. It is affordable. Dupont is already one of the most densely populated sectors of the city. Here's my question. Do you believe this is a valid approach for Dupont Circle? Do we need more housing at the risk of gentrification, displacement, and the loss of green space? I think we're with you, Mr. Davis.
Yeah, this is a really complicated issue. I spent a lot of grad school trying to focus on gentrification and how to address it, how to preserve equity when new development happens. I mean, almost everything new has a higher cost because it's newer. It's the next best thing, and I think this is a really popular neighborhood, and it becomes a supply and demand issue. I mean, the issue I understand with Manhattan is that so many people want to move there, it's almost impossible to meet the demand. And if you can't provide more housing, it puts greater constraints on the existing residents. I mean, it's a challenging issue to work with. I mean, people have asked about the apartments behind the Masonic Temple. I've been for work looking into these community benefits agreements. One of the things that I've heard is that they wouldn't want to do a planned unit development because that requires community input. We don't want to have fraught debates around all these things. But what I've done in the last week is I've asked the Chastleton board to look into what it would take to potentially sell our parking lot to this development, accommodate all of our parking needs in that parking lot that they're already building, or that parking garage they're already building, and potentially turn the Chastleton parking lot into a park. Maybe that by scaling up, we can potentially meet more needs for more people. If that's a planned unit development with a community benefits agreement, instead of having 2 levels of English basement, maybe they have 1 more level of parking and they can build a little bit taller. There's setback requirements. You can do tasteful buildings that fit in contextually with historic buildings. I mean, when I was at the Smithsonian, I think a lot of our focus was on the zoo at the time, and with a diversity of building types from different eras. And I think the biggest takeaway for me was that buildings should look like the era in which they're built. That historic preservation is about preserving and maintaining the important, valuable things we already have, but not necessarily preventing new development and more people from enjoying those benefits. It's a difficult needle to thread, but I think if we can create more benefits for the community, through these kind of processes, it could help all of us better, more. I don't know. It's a challenging issue because it requires community input and collaboration to get some of these things working.
Yes, it does. Thank you very much. That's a very full answer. Mr. Sprowls, it's your turn.
Yes, you won't find a greater YIMBY yes in my backyard than me. I do believe that more housing is necessary, particularly infill housing, particularly in this neighborhood. There are plenty of places where housing can be built in this neighborhood and around it. For example, just go up to Adams Morgan, you'll see the old plaza that's sitting there for year after year after year, and condominiums or apartments could be built there. Across from Meridian Park, there's another parcel where housing could be built. The fact is that in the housing market, like most any market, trickle down is the truth. People, richer or wealthier people, do buy new houses, and poor people buy used houses, and that's just life. Gentrification, sure, if the neighborhood gets better, then the value of property is going to rise. But it seems that the city is spending hundreds of millions of dollars on making housing available for people who cannot afford to live in the neighborhood. Is that really something that's sustainable? In my opinion, it isn't. You have to live in a place that you can afford, or you get a roommate, or one of the biggest problems in DC, not to stretch this out too long, is that so many people don't have jobs. Well, if you don't have a job, you're not going to be able to rent anywhere. So I think that the effort on spending hundreds of millions of dollars on housing for low income or no income people is misplaced. Instead, the emphasis should be on development by developers, which costs the city nothing, and creates more neighbors, more houses, more happy people.
All right, thank you. I'm going to have a question here that's related to the Masonic Temple that Dupont East Civic Action Association has filed a lawsuit in the city for. And what Mr. Sprowls mentioned just trickled my brain. The Masonic Temple is planning to put subterranean apartments. That is unheard of. In New York City, it was outlawed. But this desire to live in Dupont Circle is so great, they're going underground. They're going 15 feet underground to make apartments. All right. The Masonic Temple development is the subject of a lawsuit by our association, DECAA, and is historic in its breadth and consequences for the city and historic preservation. It is not about housing. It is about a dispute over historic preservation, namely that the proposed building is too large and inappropriate for the site in a historic district, and that it would obscure the rear view of a world-renowned historic landmark. In litigation, we further discovered that our constitutional right of due process was violated to the detriment of the whole community. Construction has begun, but even the courts are saying that it is at the risk of the developer. Here's my question. Do you see historic preservation as a tool for saving the precious resources of the city and our neighborhood? Do you see historic preservation as a tool for saving the precious resources of the city. Mr. Sprowls?
What's your definition of a resource?
Well, an open space, for example, the area behind the temple would be a resource. Public land would be a
Okay.
resource.
If that's your definition of a resource, then no, that's privately owned property, and it's entitled, the owners of the temple is entitled to use the property as desired. It's within zone. You've already filed a lawsuit that you have lost in court. This has been done before the Historic Preservation Review Board twice, where all your arguments have lost. This is decided. This building is going to be built and finished, and we're going to have 150 new apartments and perhaps 300 new neighbors who can enjoy Dupont Circle. So this is a done deal, Nick.
Well, I know you're following it closely, but the Court of Appeals dealt with the case and they did not dismiss it. They retained one of 9 issues and they sent 8 more back to the Superior Court. And I think on June 30, there will be a hearing there at the Superior Court. Mr. Davis, do you have a comment about the use of historic preservation as a tool for saving the precious resources of the city?
I think saving precious resources is part of it. It depends on what is, like Larry said, what we define as those. I mean, I agree that what they're doing is a by right project, as far as I know, as long as they're within code and zoning, they can proceed with what they're doing. What I've offered in potentially trying to merge the development with the existing Chastleton parking lot is offer them something that they haven't had the opportunity to do before, and provide both housing and a park, because I've heard that people want more places to read and do different things that maybe they can't do in some of the existing parks that have different uses. I don't know, that proximity to resources like parks and libraries and public restrooms. That's another thing I've heard a lot about. 24-hour access to restrooms in the neighborhood is a critical issue. But yeah, I mean, yeah, I think of historic preservation primarily through the lens of buildings. And I don't think anyone's suggesting, like tearing down the temple. Like that's absolutely going to be preserved. The Chastleton's a 100-year-old building. I think this is a beautiful, but hopefully with an agreement like this, maybe we can do more to restore this beautiful old building that used to have a restaurant with a dance studio, and I think a bodega on the ground floor. But yeah, it's a really interesting issue to dive into the history of the neighborhood and figure out what it is that we truly want to preserve.
Well, I want to move along now. I promised Mr. Sprowls an opportunity to bring up the streeteries. Here's a question for you all. Explain how you differ from your opponent. What would you bring to the job of ANC commissioner that your opponent would not bring? What would you do differently or the same as your predecessor in any of the areas we've discussed? Let's start with you, Mr. Davis.
Well, I would collaborate with people on the ANC.
Okay.
Create more buildings in the neighborhood, like on the Safeway, because that would be a great place for apartments. But yeah, I would definitely collaborate with the community quite a bit on some of these. I think the ANC.
Well, is that what you? I'm sorry. Is that how you differ from your opponent, or is that how you would continue?
I don't know. I mean, my background is in architecture, and the integrative process is a fundamental part of what we talk about with like the triple bottom line, environmental social governance, this whole impact, way of trying to plan the future. It's by nature trying to be a collaborative process. And I think how many MBAs and master's degrees and PhDs live in this neighborhood? I mean,
yeah,
it seems like we've got a ton of smart people who can work together to solve the problems that we have.
Thank you. That's really smart. Okay, Mrs. Sprowls. How would you, let's see. How would you differ from your opponent? Also, would you continue the thinking of your predecessor or be different from him? What can you say?
I think that the way I would differ from him the most, and he seemed to be absolutely an encampment supporter. And so I would have an absolute disagreement on trying to keep those encampments in Dupont Circle, even the one in front of the old Safeway that was finally gotten rid of back in August of last year. I don't know what he was thinking. I don't know what Robin Nunn is thinking, who is from the ANC2B04 right across the street. So that is where we disagree the most. As far as the other things that that he said, I guess things were reasonable. As far as putting apartments on top of Safeway, that is a great idea. I think it's been explored in the past and the owner of the building wasn't willing to do it, but it certainly would be a great, it's a great idea.
Well, thank you. Let's now, this is the last question. If you've given it any thought, what would you ask your opponent? Mrs. Sprowls, you want to ask a question of your opponent?
Chris, are you willing to drop out? Okay, I guess you're not. I guess you're not willing to do that. What would I ask my opponent? I don't really know him that well. In fact, I don't know him at all until we had this meeting here. What is your position? Oh, okay. Here's my question. What's your position on the streeteries as far as their purpose initially, and what should be done with them, if anything, going into the future, and in particular past the planned expiration date at the end of 2023?
I mean, they were originally started because of COVID and needing to social distance and provide more space for restaurants that couldn't accommodate people inside. I mean, it's funny, if you've gone to Europe, I mean, some of the most beautiful streets throughout Europe and a lot of other places have wonderful outdoor seating. I mean, if we can accommodate that more, I think it'd make it a much more pleasant space. It's just, how do you make that all weather year round? How do you accommodate all of the different needs of people? But I don't know. I think there's a way to work with them to make sure everyone's needs are met. Yeah.
Can I answer my own question?
You'll have a chance.
Oh, okay.
Mr. Davis, do you have a question? I don't want to disappoint our listeners. We're getting to the end of the time.
I would like to know, what's your favorite part of living in this neighborhood?
I like that we have a reasonable number of facilities. For example, the grocery store is right across the street, hardware store, CVS is just 2 blocks down. And that is just an urban neighborhood. I mean, I have lived in the suburbs. I was raised in the suburbs, and it's just a completely different environment, which I really like. I mean, there are times when DC makes me really angry. I think that the city council is not very responsive, well, at least my point of view, and the city council, and particularly Pinto, we do not agree on things. So sometimes I think, you know, maybe I should move to the suburbs. And then I'll rent a car and I'll ride out there and I'll think, no, this is not for me. So here I'm back in Dupont Circle, 1624 Corcoran Street. So yeah, that's why I like living in the city.
All right, I think we're really close to the end of the time and we're not too far off. I want to give you both a chance to for end statements. If you want a couple of minutes, okay, but I'm going to start with 1 minute. And this might be, I apologize, Mr. Sprowls, but maybe you can bring in your streeteries here. If you have a lot to say about that, we'll give you time. So I think, did I lose track, Mrs. Sprowls? Why don't you start? This is your summing up statement.
I think I went first the last time. If Chris wants to.
I could do it, I could switch it. I'm sorry, I get confused.
It's up to you guys.
All right, Mr. Davis.
Well, no, thank you so much for having me. I don't know, I've lived here for, well, in the Chastleton since 2014. I've got a ton of friends here. I think it's such a fascinating neighborhood. This is a global community. People from all over the world move here. I have friends from probably every continent at this point. And I think that's part of what makes, you know, solving problems for more people and bringing the community together to really, do what we can to support everyone, I think is really important. And so I've been incredibly grateful for the friends I've had who've supported me, the professional colleagues that I've had, the volunteer colleagues who've been constantly pushing me to improve myself. I'm a lifelong learner, and I hope that working with all of you, I can continue to do that.
Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
All right, Mr. Sprowls, your turn.
Okay, I'm going to make my comment on the streeteries. Because I do think it's a rather important issue. Yes, initially they were designed to save the restaurants. It was a really brilliant idea because it enabled people who are no longer can go inside to sit outside. However, the question is what's going to happen in the long run. I think on 17th Street, some of the restaurants already had outside space, and now they are using additional outside space for which they pay, I guess, some nominal amount. In some cases, it's gone wild. For example, Annie's has expanded all the way down the block, including because, and I asked the folks at Prego, which is on the corner, why is the streetery right in front of your restaurant store? It's because she told me because Annie's owns the building, so therefore they could put it. And for Subway and Prego, it's just not a good idea for another restaurant to put its streetery right in front of the door. The other thing is, once it comes time to remove the streeteries, are the restaurant going to see this as some kind of entitlement, that they are somehow entitled to use the street, whether it be 19th Street or 20th Street or the corner of, or along the edge of 17th Street. And the longer that you allow this, the longer it will become that restaurants will see this as an entitlement. And finally, in terms of 17th Street, I think that this just screwed up the design of the street. And I don't think that the restaurants are really going to suffer once the streetery is removed. They all have outside space anyway. Either they're using the sidewalk, so that I think things will be better, at least along 17th Street, when the streeteries are gone. It's a bigger problem. What do you do about 19th Street, where they've taken over the whole street, or 20th Street? It's a big problem, but I think that in this local area, that when they will be gone, I think it will be a better situation. That was my.
Well, thank you very much. I think that brings us to the end of the program. I don't mean to disappoint Mr. Sprowls, but there is talk in Pinto's office and on your ANC to keep the streeteries permanent. So thank you to our candidates, especially. It's a privilege to have you both, and to our sponsors, and to you, our neighbor. Yes, you. I hope you learned something. I hope you're able to participate in the election coming up. We still need the details of when that's going to happen and how. But we're ready. We're better ready. And you've had a chance to see the candidates up front and personal. We look for your feedback. The video will be available on Facebook almost immediately. And you can share it with your friends. Let us know what you think. Join DECAA. That's a good organization. Join DECAA. Subscribe to Hear Us Now. It encourages discussion. And attend your ANC meetings and make your voices heard. There is strength in community engagement and civic action. Thank you and good night. Thank you all.